Now, this follows a recent wave of sexual misconduct allegations in the entertainment industry. In the comedy world, there have been revelations surrounding Louis C.K. in the past few days. Many are asking whether this will be a turning point in how the issue is addressed. So to explore this further, I'm joined by Jocelyn, Geddie and Cathryn Naiker. Thank you both for being here with us. They're both comedians based in Toronto and join us in studio. So, first I'm going to ask you, Jocelyn, about just your reaction when we heard the revelations or the allegations against Louis C.K.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't surprised at all. Stories about Louis C.K. have been circulating in the comedy community since about 2012, possibly earlier than that. A lot of information circulates amongst women who are really trying to look out for one another and protect each other in an often difficult industry. And so when all of this came out, it unfortunately wasn't at all surprising to me.
So, Cathryn, I wanted to ask you, given the fact that these are rumors that, as we heard from Jocelyn, we've certainly heard from other members of the comedy world, that these are rumors that were circulating a long time, stories that were being shared of these sorts of allegations against Louis C.K. Was it something, you're saying it's something that didn't surprise you, but was it something that you were surprised that it took this long to come out?
I'm not totally surprised. I think it was already out, but it just wasn't so many women at once in the same article. I think the volume of that gave it more, I don't know, made more noise around it.
More power.
More power, yeah. I think there were stories since 2015, and people recently were trying to ask him questions on red carpet, so I feel like it was bubbling a bit, but it was this article and this moment in time that really brought it to the surface.
And, you sort of touched on this, Jocelyn, about how it's a relatively small industry with women in comedy, as it's still growing. So is this something that could be considered a systemic problem in comedy?
Oh, absolutely. I think that sexual harassment, unfortunately, is endemic to virtually every industry in the entire world. So it certainly occurs in comedy as well. I think anywhere where there are significant imbalances in terms of a power dynamic between people who enjoy a privileged stance in the community versus women who are trying to enter, who really just want to try and meet new people and make new connections and get along. There's the opportunity there for potential abuses to occur, unfortunately.
And so we also want to look at the Canadian industry. So certainly, it's small when you're talking about the entire industry in North America, but what about the Canadian industry, even smaller than when we're looking at it? What's your experience been, Cathryn? Have you seen this? Have you experienced this sort of behavior?
Oh, I've absolutely seen it. Of course, I've experienced it. I think this ranges anywhere from being uncomfortable to traumatic for various women in the community. Things I think that happen maybe more commonly is you're at a bar, you're trying to network because that's where a place of work is, and then that might be misconstrued as something else, and then you're getting weird messages from people, and then that makes it uncomfortable for the next time you're at that comedy club, or the next time you're trying to get booked on a show. You're maybe trying to avoid them or sidestep them, and that accumulatively could impact someone's career because you're constantly trying to avoid or move around somebody or multiple people because they've made you uncomfortable.
And so staying with that point then, is that what makes it so difficult to come forward? Because it did sort of take this somewhat avalanche of allegations for people to sort of get the strength to come forward and make allegations of their own or bring forward their experiences. So, maybe Jocelyn, touching on that last point that was made by Cathryn, because these are dynamics where someone could influence your career, and you are in these sort of situations where there could be mixed messages. Is that what makes it difficult, or is there more? Is there a broader picture?
That's certainly a part of it. I think another part with comedy as well is that there is an inherent belief in comedy that there needs to be no subject that can't be explored. And so for women, I think we all feel a lot of pressure in virtually every stage of our careers to be receptive and engaged and to go along with jokes or situations that make us uncomfortable difficult to prove that we deserve our space at the table. And so you can feel as though you have permitted bad behavior to occur because you're acting receptive in a moment. So those are kinds of the conditions that allow this behavior, I think, to flourish and to make them very difficult for people to call out. I mean, one of the other examples that we often encounter is, let's say, an improv scene that starts in one way and all of a sudden starts to move in a direction that makes the female participant in that scene really uncomfortable. It wasn't something that she consented to, but it's difficult to point out that moment, both for the person participating because she doesn't want to feel as though she isn't able to do everything in comedy that comedians are expected to do, and for people watching who believe that there should be no stone left unturned.
So is that deliberate then, do you think, when people sort of take that turn towards something that may push the envelope into, you know, a sexual area that the other participant in sort of improv situation might not be comfortable, but they're pushing that envelope because they know that they're putting this female in a position where they have to go along with it?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I mean, with Louis C.K., with him, I'm really interested because his recent work touches so specifically on the allegations about him. And now, looking back at his work, both in I Love You, Daddy, the film that was just canceled, and then even in Louis the Show, it feels almost toxic and macabre to feel like how much was he trying to talk about these issues or push the envelope in those ways. In other ways, though, I do think it can start from a really simple and well-intentioned place, and it just becomes a larger discussion about us not really understanding or having a good sense of boundaries and consent, and that what might feel comfortable to one participant might feel really toxic and uncomfortable to another participant. So, I mean, for me, I know I've been in writers' rooms or, you know, in comedic situations where a joke has been made, and I can tell that nothing really was intended in a malicious way by the person who said it, but what was said was incredibly upsetting to me. That kind of thing, yeah.
Right.
And you know, Cathryn, I wanted to ask you, you know, finally, I'll get both of your takes on this, but Cathryn, let's start with you about the response we've seen. First, let's start with the response from Louis C.K., and then we'll go into the others. But Louis C.K. admitted to it. He did put that sort of, it's being interpreted somewhat as a caveat that I did ask if I could, you know, expose myself to these women. But he did say that he admitted to doing that behavior, the allegations that were made in the New York Times article there. So what do you make of his response? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lack of understanding of consent there. I mean, part of asking is waiting for an answer from another woman. Like, I don't really think he waited for those women to say yes. I think he just did it, and that was really why it was so awful. I'm not, this is a personal opinion, I'm not really thrilled with his response. I think he waited until he had no other options to respond to this. He was constantly denying this. And I think he's just doing what he can to salvage whatever his career is going to be going forward.
And I want to ask you, Jocelyn, not about Louis C.K., but so Louis C.K., for example, in whatever capacity, he did admit to it, apologize for it. But there are so many who are denying any allegations. And of course, you know, I mean, it is allegations at this stage. So what do you think about that response?
In terms of the people who are trying to defend him, or?
In terms of all of the other allegations we've seen, and there's so many people out there that outright are denying these allegations, how do you think that reflects on then those accusers who've had, who've come forward? I mean, how does this all play out?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, it becomes a really difficult situation and scenario for the complainants. I mean, I think with virtually every example we've seen of people coming forward, there are stories of those women trying to have their stories told, not only women, men as well, but trying to have their stories and experiences heard, and being faced with a deluge of people denying that these things happen to them. Sometimes these things can escalate into the complainants receiving death threats, not being able to navigate particular situations. So, I mean, it's a really difficult and huge decision for people to come forward for precisely those reasons, because the reception can be so toxic and so frightening that it makes you feel as though you could be really damaging your prospects in your career, or, you know, endangering yourself if you come forward. So yeah, I mean, generally these things are accompanied by such a wave of toxicity and anger. It's really uncomfortable and difficult.
Well, we are going to have to leave this conversation right there, but this is a very important conversation, interesting one too. Thank you so much for both joining us. That was Jocelyn Geddie and Cathryn Naiker joining me in studio. Thank you.